The needle slid through the ivory silk as though it had been waiting its whole life for my hands. I'd threaded it so many times these past months. It felt like an old friend, obedient, steady, and silent. Each stitch was more than thread through fabric. It was a prayer I whispered in the quiet of my kitchen after the world had gone to bed. For 6 months, the evenings belonged to me, my sewing machine, and the dream I was building for my daughter, Sophie. The work was slow, the kind of slow that demands devotion. French seams so neat they could have been drawn with a ruler. Hand-rolled hems that took hours for just a few inches. Seed pearls, one by one, coaxed into place with tiny, patient stitches until my fingers cracked and bled. The gown stretched across my dining table like a river of moonlight, each ripple in the silk alive under the lamplight. The fabric had cost me more than 3 weeks of groceries from my pension, but I never thought twice. It wasn't a purchase, it was a promise. I'm 62 now. My hands are not as quick as when I made my own wedding dress 40 years ago, but they know more. They know the weight of fabric and the feel of quality thread. They know how to guide a needle through silk without puckering it, how to spot a misaligned seam before it turns into regret. And they know, above all, how to pour love into something until it becomes more than the sum of its parts. This wasn't just silk and lace, it was the story of us. Every pleat held a memory. Sophie at 8 years old, in the first dress I made her for the spring recital. Sophie at 16, rolling her eyes when I tried to teach her the basics of hemming. Sophie at 25, calling me late one night to say she'd met someone different. Now she was 28 and getting married, and this dress. This was my last big gift as her mother. The morning of the wedding, the kitchen was flooded with sunlight. I wrapped the gown in acid-free tissue paper, the way my mother taught me to keep precious things safe. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught me off guard. Thinner than I remembered. Hair streaked with silver. The same woman who had been a teacher for 37 years, who had stretched every dollar after James died so Sophie could have piano lessons, college, and opportunities I never had. But my eyes, they were steady, proud. I had done something beautiful. The Fairmont Grand rose in the distance like a palace I had no business entering. Sophie hadn't chosen it. Margot Pierce, her future mother-in-law, had. Margot was a woman who lived in curated perfection, immaculate hair, diamond earrings you could see from across a room, and a voice that turned polite words into orders. She didn't ask. She orchestrated. I'd offered to help with the flowers or the cake, something modest but heartfelt. Margot had smiled in that way of hers, all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, Claire, you've done so much already. Just come and enjoy the day." Enjoy. I clung to the word, though part of me wondered if I'd be allowed to. The bridal suite was a whirlwind of expensive chaos. A makeup artist painted Sophie's face into something both stunning and slightly unfamiliar. A hairstylist pinned her brown gold hair into perfect loops. Photographers roamed like hunters, capturing candid shots that looked rehearsed. Sophie sat in the middle of it all, calm, beautiful, and not entirely herself. The little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms had been polished into something magazine-worthy, and I couldn't quite see where my daughter was under all that shine. "Mom," she said when she saw me. There was a flicker of relief in her voice, but also that careful tone I recognized, the one she used when she wasn't sure if I'd meet her expectations. "Good, you're here. We're almost ready for the dress." I lifted the garment bag with reverence. 6 months of sewing after long days. 6 months of budgeting to afford the best silk. 6 months of imagining the moment she would slip it on. "I brought it," I said softly. Margot turned toward me, her eyes taking in the garment bag. "Ah, the handmade dress," she said, the way someone might say, "Oh, you brought homemade cookies to a formal banquet." How thoughtful. I unzipped the bag slowly. The silk emerged like poured light. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Sophie's hand twitched toward it, but Margot was faster. It's very handmade, Margot said, her voice even but lined with disapproval. She stepped closer, inspecting the pearl beadwork. The detail is rustic. Rustic. 6 months of labor dismissed in a single word meant for country furniture. I just think, Margot went on smoothly, for the photographs, the Vera Wang from the boutique would be more appropriate. Sophie looked from Margot to me, and in her eyes I saw the calculation. Not cruelty, but survival. The kind of choice people make when they believe appearances can secure their future. She hesitated for only a second before saying, Mom, maybe we should go with the other one. This one's just not right for the venue. I felt something inside me fold in on itself. Not break. Breaks can be mended. This was different. This was a quiet acceptance that my gift, my offering, wasn't wanted. I smiled anyway, because that's what I've always done for her. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes you happy. I folded the dress back into its tissue paper as carefully as I'd sewn it. Years of being a teacher had taught me how to handle disappointment with dignity. Then I stepped into the hallway, not just to give them privacy, but to find air. The carpet softened the sounds from the suite, but through the half-closed door, the voices carried. Thank God you came to your senses, Margot said. Can you imagine the photos? Everyone would wonder where that dress came from. Sophie's laugh followed light, just a touch nervous. If anyone asks, I'll just say it didn't fit. It looked like something from a thrift store anyway. I stood still. The garment bag pressed to my chest. 6 months of my life. 6 months of skill and love, reduced to thrift store embarrassment. When I finally walked away, I didn't rush. Every step toward the elevator felt deliberate, like I was leaving something behind that I couldn't get back. As the doors closed, I saw Sophie, in my mind radiant in her boutique gown, zipped up by Margot, relief in her face. My dress stayed silent in its bag, untouched, unseen. Outside, the city kept moving, but for me, something had ended. The elevator doors slid shut with a quiet sigh, the kind you hear when someone gives up arguing. The descent was smooth, but my heart wasn't. It beat in heavy, deliberate thuds, as if it knew something I wasn't ready to face. The garment bag in my arms felt heavier than it had all morning. Not because of the silk inside, but because of what it no longer meant. I could have walked straight out of the hotel. I should have, but my hand hovered over the control panel, fingers resting on the open button. Part of me still clung to the fragile hope that Sophie might send for me, that she'd realize Margot's approval was worth less than the love sewn into every seam of this dress. It's ridiculous, the way hope survives even when you've seen the knife. The metallic hum of the elevator reminded me of a different sound 15 years ago, the faint squeak of Sophie's sneakers as she ran down the hallway to show me the dress I'd made for her school play. She'd twirled so fast the hem lifted, and she'd laughed, breathless, shouting, "It's perfect, Mom!" The memory rose uninvited, warm and bright. And for a heartbeat, I let it fool me into thinking some part of that little girl still lived in the woman upstairs. Then the voices came. They drifted down from the mezzanine above, bouncing off the polished marble and echoing into the space where I stood. Margot's voice was precise. Every syllable clipped like she was trimming away loose threads. Thank God you came to your senses. You would have regretted it for the rest of your life. Sophie's reply was softer, but the marble carried it to me without distortion. If anyone asks, I'll just say it didn't fit. Honestly, it looked like something from a thrift store. No nervous laugh, no hesitation, just a clean, sharp cut. The sound didn't split me open all at once. It seeped in slowly, like cold water, finding its way into every seam of a boat. I'd been bracing myself ever since Margot's eyes skimmed over the dress like it was a misprint in her perfect script. But this wasn't about the gown anymore. It was about me, my work, my taste, my worth. People imagine betrayal as an explosion, loud and undeniable. but more often it's quiet. It hides in pauses too long before a compliment, in the way a hand doesn't reach for yours when you expect it, in the casual dismissal of something you've poured yourself into. I let the elevator doors close, but instead of leaving, I stepped out into the side hallway that curved behind the grand staircase. From there, I could see the bridal party through the decorative railing, like an audience watching a play from the wings. The Vera Wang gown hung in the background, its bodice gleaming under the lights, smug in its certainty that it would be the one to walk down the aisle. Margot stood with her arms folded, directing the morning's events as if she were the producer of a Broadway show. Sophie was laughing at something the photographer said, tilting her head just so, the way she used to when she was 17, and angling for a better yearbook photo. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but I couldn't see the girl who once clutched my hand during thunderstorms, the one who used to wear dresses just because I'd made them. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who understood the currency of appearances. I turned away. The hotel's flower arrangements lined the hall, tall glass vases filled with white lilies and blush roses, each stem placed with clinical precision. They were flawless, in the same way Margot liked things to be flawless. Symmetrical, predictable, untouched by anything human. They reminded me of Sophie's wedding now, a display to be admired from a distance, not touched, not lived in. By the time I reached my car, the late morning air had cooled, sharp enough to raise goosebumps on my skin. I walked slowly, not because of the dress's weight, but because each step felt like part of a farewell I wasn't ready to finish. I laid the garment bag across the back seat, smoothing the plastic as if that could erase the wrinkles in my heart. The drive home took me past the skeleton of my old life, the high school where I taught English for nearly 4 decades, the park where Sophie had learned to ride her bike, wobbling and laughing, the small house James and I bought when we still believed we had forever. They all seemed smaller now. Maybe they'd always been small, and I'd just seen them through the magnifying glass of a life lived for someone else. Home was silent, in a way the hotel had never been. I carried the dress inside, unzipped the bag, and spread it across my dining table again. The afternoon light spilled over it like water, catching the seed pearls and turning them into tiny constellations. My fingers traced the seams hidden from view, perfect, strong. Stronger than the woman who had just been told her work looked like a bargain bin find. This was not thrift store work. This was months of skill, decades of practice, a lifetime of love for the craft. It was me. In silken thread, I brewed tea English breakfast, strong enough to stand a spoon upright, and sat by the window. Somewhere across the city, Sophie was walking down an aisle in a dress chosen for its price tag and label, her arm hooked in the man she'd chosen as her future. I hoped he was worth it. I hoped she was happy. But here, in the quiet, I began to understand. I wasn't going to give this dress to anyone who couldn't see what it was. That evening, I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I didn't even open the small bottle of wine I'd planned to drink after the reception. Instead, I walked into my sewing room, turned on the lamp, and pulled a notebook from the bottom drawer. It had been years since I'd used it back when I still jotted down sketches and fabric swatches for ideas I never had time to make. On the first clean page, I wrote, "This dress will never belong to someone who doesn't value it." And for the first time that day, my hands stopped shaking. 3 days went by without a word from Sophie. No text, no flowers, no voicemail filled with half apologies. The kind of silence that doesn't leave space for healing, only for pretending nothing happened. Oddly enough, I didn't mind. The dress stayed on the dining table, not as a wound, but as a presence. Each time I walked past it, I found myself pausing not to grieve, but to study it with fresh eyes. The beadwork on the bodice, each pearl, placed with careful intent, caught the afternoon light and reminded me that my worth had never lived in someone else's approval. It had always been in the work itself. On the 4th day, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman on my porch, her curly brown hair tumbling loose from a bun, a casserole dish balanced in both hands. She wore a coat one size too big, the kind that holds winters in its lining. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked when I opened the door. Her voice was warm, her eyes clear but edged with determination. "I'm Lena Hart. I live above the bakery on Maple Street. You might not remember me, but I did." Sophie had mentioned her years ago, back when grad school and coffee shop study sessions were still part of her life. A girl who could pour a perfect cappuccino heart. "I brought you something," Lena said, holding up the dish. "Chicken enchiladas, my grandmother's recipe. I figured you might not feel like cooking this week." I blinked, caught between gratitude and curiosity. "How did you—" Her expression shifted, softening with something like anger on my behalf. "Sophie called me 3 nights ago from Cabo. She told me about the dress. And what she said." Lena's jaw tightened. "I wanted to fly down there and shake some sense into her, but Mexico's a bit far for that." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Come in. I was just making coffee." She stepped inside, and her eyes immediately went to the dining table. She froze. "Oh my God. That's it, isn't it?" She set the casserole down without looking away from the gown, walking toward it as if she might disturb the air around it. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This is breathtaking. The beadwork alone, how long did it take you?" 6 months, I said. Her head snapped toward me. 6 months. And she called it thrift store? I didn't answer. The truth sat in the space between us. "You know," Lena said, circling the table, "this is the kind of craftsmanship you see in couture archives, the kind you can't buy unless you have the connections and the money, and even then, you might not find something this good." "You know about construction?" I asked. "I went to fashion school," she said, "just 1 year before my dad got sick. Had to come home and help with the family restaurant. Been waitressing and doing alterations ever since, but I've never seen anything like this, not even in New York showrooms." A warmth stirred in my chest, unfamiliar after the cold of the past week. To be seen, truly seen by someone who understood, was a gift I hadn't expected. "Coffee?" I offered. We sat in the kitchen, steam curling from our mugs, while she asked questions only a fellow craftsperson would think to ask. How did I get the seams so flat? How did I set the sleeves without puckers? How did I match the pearls so they caught the light in unison? Between sips, she said, "My cousin Emma is getting married in 3 months. Social worker. Her fiancé teaches kindergarten. Budget's basically zero. She's been looking at polyester dresses online for under $200 and crying about it. That's tough," I murmured, though I could hear where she was going. "She's about Sophie's size, maybe a touch taller, and I swear to you, if she wore something like this, she'd never stop smiling." I glanced toward the dress. "You think she'd want it?" "Even knowing—" "She'd be honored," Lena said firmly. "Emma values things made with love. She'd understand." That afternoon, Lena returned with Emma. Emma Reed was 31, with warm brown eyes and laugh lines that told the story of a life spent giving more than she kept for herself. She stopped short in the doorway when she saw the dress. "Aunt Claire," she said, using the family courtesy title without hesitation. "Did you make this?" "Yes," I said. "For Sophie. She didn't wear it." Emma guessed. "Number—" She chose something else. Emma stepped closer, her hands hovering as if touching it might be too much. "It's too beautiful," she said softly. "It belongs in a cathedral, not in my backyard wedding." "This dress was made to celebrate love," I told her. "To make a bride feel beautiful on one of the most important days of her life." "That could be you." Lena nudged her. "Try it on." 20 minutes later, Emma stood in my bedroom mirror, transformed. The silk poured over her curves like water over smooth stone, the pearls catching light with every breath she took. Her eyes glistened. "I look like a bride," she whispered. You look like yourself, I said, just elevated. For a moment, I didn't see Sophie in a boutique gown. I saw the little girl in a spring recital dress, twirling until she was dizzy, calling out, "It's perfect, Mom." And in that reflection, I found the pride I thought I'd lost. Lena raised her phone. Hold still. Lena, I began. Just one picture. You'll thank me. The photo captured more than a dress. It caught the way Emma's shoulders had squared with confidence, the way her smile reached her eyes, the way Love My Love lived in every seam. Lena looked at it and let out a slow breath. This isn't just a dress, she said. It's a story. And stories like this, they travel. She glanced at me with a half smile. Trust me, once this picture is out there, it won't stay small. People notice beauty when it's this real. Something in her tone made me pause. Within hours of her posting it to Instagram, her phone was vibrating nonstop. By the next morning, the image had been shared over 2,000 times. Brides were sending messages, local seamstresses were offering congratulations. And somewhere in the noise of it all, I felt the first tremor of a door opening that I hadn't even known was closed. By the time the second day of the post's life rolled around, my landline, yes, my old-fashioned landline was ringing more in a single morning than it had in the past month. The calls weren't just from friends. There were unknown numbers, out-of-state numbers, numbers with area codes I hadn't seen since James and I took our honeymoon through the Northeast. I didn't answer any of them. But I did check my email, something I usually reserved for paying bills and the occasional note from the Quilting Guild. There were 32 unread messages waiting. Half were from brides, to be some with elaborate stories of how they had been searching for a dress that felt like love. The rest came from people who simply wanted to tell me the photo had moved them. They wrote about their mother's or grandmother's wedding gowns, about the smell of fabric shops they used to visit as children, about how they'd sat at a kitchen table while an older relative worked a sewing machine with the same reverence as prayer. One message stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Margaret Chen, the curator of a small fashion history museum in Boston. She had seen the photo on Instagram. It came across my feed 3 times in one day, she wrote, and she wanted to know if I had ever considered exhibiting my work. She called the gown an exceptional example of contemporary heirloom craftsmanship. I read her words twice, then a third time, as though repetition would make them more real. No one had ever called my work exceptional before. Not in writing, not in a way that could be printed and framed. By late afternoon, Lena dropped by, her cheeks pink from the wind, her phone glowing in her hand. We've hit 15,000 likes, she said, leaning against the doorway like a cat who'd just caught a bird. And people are still sharing. That's a lot, I suppose, I said, my voice more hesitant than impressed. A lot? She laughed, shaking her head. Claire, this is the kind of traction small businesses dream of. If you wanted to make dresses full-time, this is your launch. I poured her a cup of coffee, the way my mother used to, when visitors came with news, good or bad. I haven't run a business in my life, Lena. I taught Shakespeare to teenagers. I made prom dresses for Sophie's friends because they couldn't afford the ones in the mall. That's not the same thing. Teenagers and tulle aren't that far apart, she said, smiling. Both require patience, vision, and the ability to fix disasters before they walk out the door. Her words sat with me long after she left. That evening, I scrolled through the Instagram post for the first time. The comments were a tangle of hearts, crying face emojis, and stories from strangers. One woman wrote, "My mom made my dress before she passed away. Seeing this feels like a hug from her." Another said, "If my wedding dress had looked like this, I might still be married." That one made me laugh out loud, though it was tinged with something bittersweet. Then I saw Sophie's name. She had commented just one line. "Glad the dress found someone who appreciates it." The words weren't cruel, but they carried the same hollow ring as a thank you card sent out of obligation. I closed the app without responding. Over the next week, the attention didn't fade. It grew. The local paper ran a feature with the headline, "From Rejection to Recognition. The Wedding Dress That Stole the Internet's Heart." They sent a photographer to my house, and I found myself standing in my sewing room, holding a spool of thread for the camera. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophie had refused to be photographed in my work, and now it was going out to thousands of readers without her in the frame at all. Margaret Chen from the museum called next. She wanted the dress for a temporary exhibit on modern heirlooms. "It's more than fabric and beads," she said. "It's a testament to devotion, artistry, and resilience." And I told her the dress was promised to Emma for her wedding in June. Without missing a beat, she suggested we display it for 2 months before the ceremony. "We'll insure it, of course, and you'd be credited as the designer." Designer. I had never worn that title before. I'd been seamstress, mom who sews, Mrs. Whitmore who helps with costumes, but never designer. The word felt both too big and exactly right. Lena came over that night, and we sat with tea while I told her about the offer. Her grin widened with each detail. "Claire, this is it. This is the universe kicking down the door you never thought to open." "I'm 58 years old," I reminded her. "Starting something new isn't exactly on my to-do list." "Maybe it should be," she said. "Maybe it's been on the list all along, but you wrote it in invisible ink." The next morning, I called Margaret and agreed. The museum sent a courier for the dress, packaged it in acid-free paper, and promised it would be handled with the kind of care usually reserved for century-old lace. Watching it leave my house was oddly freeing, like sending a child off to a better school, knowing they'll come back wiser. Emma came by the following week to see the dress in its display case. We stood together in the museum's softly lit gallery, the silk glowing under the spotlights, a small plaque reading, "Wedding Gown, 2025. Designer, Claire Whitmore." Emma squeezed my hand. "You realize this means hundreds of people will see it before I even walk down the aisle." "Good," I said. "Let them see. Let them know it's yours." As we left, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass, standing a little taller, shoulders squared, not because I'd been validated by strangers, but because I'd remembered something essential. I had always been more than someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's seamstress. I was a maker, a creator, a storyteller in silk and thread. Still, a faint unease stirred in me that night as I checked my phone before bed. Among the dozens of new notifications, there was a message request from Margot. Just 5 words. "We need to talk. Soon." And somehow, I knew she wasn't calling to congratulate me. Margot's message sat in my inbox like a small, ticking device. 5 words, each one clipped, deliberate. "We need to talk. Soon." I stared at it for a full minute before setting my phone down. I told myself I'd answer in the morning, when the daylight could soften whatever was coming. But at 9:42 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, her name lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Claire," she said, her voice brisk and cool, as if she were chairing a board meeting rather than calling her daughter's mother. "Have you seen the comments on that post?" "I've seen some," I replied cautiously. "Well, they're all over the place. People are talking about Sophie. They're saying she's ungrateful, spoiled. Some are even tagging her in nasty messages." Margot exhaled sharply. "You've unleashed a storm, and she's in the center of it." I tightened my grip on the phone. "I didn't unleash anything, Margot." Lena posted a photo of Emma in the dress. "I didn't expect—" "You didn't expect?" Her tone sharpened. "You've been sewing for decades, Claire. You know how beautiful that gown is. You know what a picture like that can do on social media. And yet you let it happen without thinking of the consequences for Sophie." My breath caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. Consequences? You mean people finally seeing the truth? That I poured 6 months into something she dismissed like a thrift store rag? That's not the point, Margot snapped. The point is, she's hurt. She feels betrayed. And if you cared about repairing your relationship with her, you'd take that picture down. I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing against my ribs. The picture isn't mine to take down, and even if it were, I wouldn't. It's Emma's dress now. It's her joy. I won't erase that because Sophie's pride is bruised. Margot went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but colder somehow. Then I suppose you've made your choice. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The next day, Sophie called. Not texted, called. Mom, she began without the usual pleasantries. Can we talk about this dress situation? It's not a situation, I said. It's a dress, and it's going to be in a museum before Emma wears it. That's exactly the problem, she said, her voice tight. Every time I open my phone, I see it. People tagging me, calling me names. Some of my friends have stopped following me because they're tired of the drama. I'm supposed to be planning a wedding, Mom, not dealing with a PR crisis. I let out a slow breath. You could have avoided this by being honest from the start, Sophie. By telling me you didn't want the dress before I spent half a year making it. Her tone rose, sharp enough to cut. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was, standing in front of my friends while they whispered about how the dress looked like it came from another decade? I didn't want to hurt you, so I didn't say anything. And now you've made sure the whole world thinks I'm the villain. The words landed heavy, but not in the way she intended. Something in me, something I'd been holding on to for years, gave way. Sophie, I said quietly, if telling the truth makes you a villain, maybe the problem isn't the truth. She didn't answer. I could hear her breathing on the other end, quick and shallow. Then, without another word, she hung up. I set the phone down, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying what needed to be said. It wasn't the first time Sophie and I had found ourselves on opposite sides of a truth. When she was 8, there'd been the spring recital. She had begged me for a store-bought dress, the kind with glitter glued onto stiff tulle, the kind that shed sparkles across the living room like fairy dust. Money had been tight that year, so I made her one instead, a pale blue cotton with hand-embroidered daisies around the hem. On the night of the performance, she'd worn it without complaint, but I noticed the way her eyes followed another girl's sequined skirt. After the show, she stood with her arms crossed, while other mothers complimented the dress. Later, in the car, she whispered, "It's nice, Mom, but it's not what I wanted." That was the first time I felt the sting of my work being not rejected, exactly, but quietly set aside in her heart. Back then, I told myself she was just a child, that she'd grow into gratitude. I didn't realize we were laying the first bricks of a wall that would stand between us for decades. For the next week, the family split into quiet factions. A few cousins sent me messages of support, telling me the dress was stunning and that Sophie needed to grow up. Others stayed silent, which spoke louder than any words. Even my sister, always the peacemaker, said only, "I hope you two can work it out," before changing the subject. Emma, bless her, called every other day to check in. "Ignore the noise," she told me. "This dress has brought more joy than you realize. Sophie will come around, or she won't. Either way, you've done something beautiful." Lena, ever the pragmatic one, suggested we turn the attention into action. "Start an account just for your sewing," she urged. "Post pictures of your projects. Let people see what you can do." I hesitated, but one quiet Sunday afternoon, I did it. I posted a series of photos, old prom dresses, a christening gown I'd made for a neighbor's baby, even a quilt I'd stitched during James's last year. Within hours, followers began to trickle in, many of them leaving comments about how they wished they'd had someone like me in their lives. But for every kind word, there was a reminder of the rift. A DM from someone claiming to be Sophie's friend, telling me I'd humiliated her. A comment asking why I was profiting off my daughter's pain. Even a snide message from an anonymous account. No wonder she didn't wear it. Through it all, the museum display went on. People posted selfies beside the gown, tagged me in their stories, told me how seeing it made them believe in love again. One afternoon, while visiting the exhibit to adjust the hemline that had shifted slightly on the mannequin, I overheard two women talking. "That's the dress from the viral post," one said. "The mom made it, and the daughter didn't want it. Can you imagine?" The other shook her head. "If my mother had made me something like that, I'd have worn it every day until it fell apart." Their words weren't meant for me, but they sank deep anyway. By the time I got home that night, there was another message waiting, this one from Sophie again. Just 3 words this time: "We're not done." And I knew, without a doubt, the real storm hadn't even started yet. The message "we're not done" sat on my phone like a storm cloud that refused to move on. I didn't reply. I told myself I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing it rattled me, but the truth was, it did. Not because I feared her anger, but because I knew exactly where this was headed. For the next 3 days, I went about my routine, watering the plants in the morning, checking the mail, sewing in the afternoons, but there was a low hum of tension in everything I did. Even the sound of the kettle clicking off felt sharper, like the house itself was bracing for impact. On the 3rd day, the impact arrived. The doorbell rang at 10:15 in the morning, its chime loud enough to startle me from my sewing chair. When I opened the door, Sophie stood there in a crisp beige trench coat, her hair perfectly styled, makeup immaculate, like she'd stepped straight off a bridal magazine cover. Margot was with her, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and a silk scarf, the kind of outfit that made her look like she'd been born in a boardroom. "Mom," Sophie said. Her voice clipped. "We need to talk. In person." I stepped aside, my stomach tightening as they crossed the threshold. The air in my living room seemed to shrink, pressing in around us. Margot didn't waste a second. "This has gone far enough, Claire. You've had your moment online. You've basked in the attention. Now it's time to end it, before more damage is done." "Damage to who?" I asked, folding my arms. "To Sophie," she shot back. "And to this family's reputation." I almost laughed, but my voice came out steady instead. "Since when did our family have a reputation to protect? We're not royalty, Margot. We're not even on speaking terms most of the time." Sophie took a step forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Mom, please. I'm asking you to take the picture down. To tell people it was all a misunderstanding, just stop the story from spreading any further." I looked at her. Really looked. Beneath the flawless makeup and carefully chosen words, there was a tightness in her eyes I recognized from when she was little. Not shame, not sorrow, fear. Fear of losing control over how people saw her. "This isn't just a story, Sophie," I said slowly. "It's my work, my months of labor, my love stitched into every seam. It's Emma's joy, and I won't erase it because it doesn't fit the image you want to project." Margot's voice cut in, sharp as a needle. "You're being selfish." My temper, which I'd been holding like a fragile vase, cracked. "Selfish? I gave up evenings, weekends, and half my sanity to make that dress. I asked for nothing in return except the chance to see my daughter walk down the aisle in it, and she couldn't even give me that courtesy. Now you want me to pretend it never happened? No, Margot. The selfishness isn't on my side." Sophie's eyes flashed. "So this is about punishing me. It's about telling the truth," I said, "and about not erasing myself to make you comfortable." The silence that followed was heavy, like a room thick with smoke. Margot finally spoke, her tone icy. You've made your choice, Claire. Don't expect us to stand by you when the tide turns. I met her gaze evenly. I wasn't counting on it. They left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind them felt final, like the snap of a thread you can't tie back together. The next afternoon, I learned what the tide meant. Lena called, her voice tight. Claire, Sophie just went live on Instagram. I opened my phone to see Sophie sitting in a bright, airy room, speaking directly to the camera. And I just want people to know, she said. There are two sides to every story. My mom's version has hurt me deeply, and I'm trying to focus on my wedding without constant judgment from strangers. She never named me, but the implication was loud enough. The comment section was split, some sympathetic, others vicious. One, from someone I vaguely recognized as her friend, read, "If my mom pulled a stunt like that, I'd cut her off too." I closed the app. My hands shook, but not from anger this time. It was a deep, bone-tired sadness. I sat on the couch, staring at the framed photo of Sophie as a toddler in my lap, her cheeks round, her smile unguarded. I wondered how we had gone from that little girl to this Cold War. For the first time in months, I cried not the quiet tears I'd let slip before, but deep, racking sobs that left me hollow. I thought of James, of how he'd hold my hand and tell me to stand tall. And for a moment I felt the full weight of standing alone. What I didn't know then was that Sophie's next move would drag someone else into the fire, someone I never wanted caught in the middle. By morning, I'd made a decision. I went to the museum, asked for the curator, and told her I wanted to add something to the display. Not a defensive statement, not an attack, just a note in my own handwriting, framed and placed beside the gown. It read, "This gown was made with love, for someone I thought would wear it. She didn't, but it found a bride who saw its worth. And for that I am grateful." Every stitch tells a story, not always the one we planned, but sometimes the one we needed to tell. When the note went up, visitors began taking pictures of it alongside the dress. Soon, those images started circulating online. The story shifted not from daughter versus mother, but from rejection to resilience. Emma called me that evening, her voice warm. "You've changed the tone, Claire. People are talking about grace now, not gossip." I smiled, though my heart was still heavy. Grace is harder than gossip, but it lasts longer. The following weekend, I saw Sophie at a family gathering. The air was tight, full of half-finished sentences and glances that didn't quite meet. The smell of roast chicken filled the room, but it did nothing to ease the chill in people's voices. Even laughter sounded muted, like everyone was afraid of cracking the surface. We didn't speak, but she glanced at me once long enough for me to see the mix of pride, hurt, and maybe, just maybe, understanding. For now, the line in the sand was still there, but I no longer felt the need to cross it. I didn't have to wait long to find out who Sophie had pulled into the fire. It happened 2 days after the family gathering. I was in the middle of hemming a lilac bridesmaid dress for a neighbor, a quiet, methodical task that usually calmed me when my phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Turn on channel 4. Now." I fumbled for the remote, nearly knocking over my pincushion. The television screen flickered to life, and there she was, Sophie, sitting in a bright television studio, every strand of her hair in place, wearing that same sleek designer gown from her Instagram post. A cheerful morning talk show banner scrolled across the bottom. "When family and weddings collide." My stomach knotted. The host leaned toward her, all warm smiles and faux sympathy. "Sophie, you've been at the center of quite a public story lately. Can you tell us what's really been going on?" Sophie tilted her head, her voice calm, almost gentle. "I love my mom, I do. But sometimes, love isn't enough to make people understand you." My wedding vision was completely different from what she made. and instead of resolving it privately, she let the story get away from us. And now, she paused, pressing her hand to her chest as though steadying herself. My fiancé's family has been dragged into this mess. They're getting hate messages. They had nothing to do with it. The host's eyebrows lifted. That's terrible. Who in his family has been affected the most? His mother, Sophie said without hesitation. She's a private woman. She's done nothing wrong. Yet now people are dissecting her taste, her influence over the wedding, even her parenting. All because of a dress. The host turned to the camera, her voice thick with earnestness. This is a reminder. Folks behind every viral story are real people with real feelings. I muted the television, but the damage was already spreading. Within hours, my phone buzzed with notifications, links to online articles, screenshots of Facebook posts from people I barely knew. One neighbor sent a well-meaning but stinging message. I saw the interview. I hope you two can work it out for the sake of the wedding. Even the cashier at the corner grocery, a sweet older man who usually chatted about the weather, gave me a look that lingered a beat too long before saying, "Heard you're in the news." It wasn't just Sophie controlling the narrative anymore, the town had joined in. The phone rang. It was Emma. "Claire, are you watching this unfold?" "I saw enough," I said, my throat dry. "She's making it sound like you invited the world into her wedding," Emma continued. "Like you're the one attacking her future in-laws." "I never wanted them in this," I whispered. "But she's painting it like I left them no choice." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room, the muted television casting a dull glow. For a fleeting moment, I imagined calling Sophie, laying everything bare, demanding she stop, but I knew better. Confronting her now would only harden her stance. That night, I sat at my sewing table long after midnight, the house silent, except for the soft tick of the wall clock. My hands moved over fabric, but my mind replayed her words on loop. She's a private woman. People are dissecting her parenting. I thought of my own mother, how she'd kept her dignity through every family squabble, never letting outsiders dictate her worth. I wanted that kind of quiet strength, but I also knew silence could be mistaken for surrender. By morning, I had a plan. I called the museum curator and asked if they'd let me host an artist's afternoon by the display. No speeches, no press conferences, just me, available for questions. She loved the idea, promising to share it on the museum's social pages. The day came with crisp sunlight spilling across the marble floors. I wore a charcoal skirt and a cream blouse, my hair pulled into a loose chignon. As I arrived, I ran my fingers along the glass case, holding the gown. For a moment, I let myself see it through fresh eyes, the intricate beading, the sweep of the skirt, the way it caught the light. Visitors trickled in slowly at first. A few sewing enthusiasts, curious couples, local students with sketchbooks in hand. They asked about fabrics, about stitch techniques, about the patience it took to hand sew an entire bodice. I told stories of my grandmother's kitchen table, of rainy afternoons spent with a thimble on my finger and fabric in my lap. I didn't mention Sophie. Not once. Halfway through, I noticed a figure near the doorway. Elegant silver hair, a soft pink scarf draped neatly over her shoulders. I knew her instantly, the mother of Sophie's fiancé. I stepped forward. "Mrs. Bennet," I said before I could stop myself. She smiled politely. "Claire, I wanted to see the dress for myself." Her gaze moved over the gown, pausing at the beadwork along the neckline. "It's breathtaking. Pictures don't do it justice." A lump rose in my throat. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm sorry you've been pulled into all this." Her expression softened, and she took a step closer. "Families are complicated, Claire. I've raised 3 children. I know what it's like when they make choices that sting. But for what it's worth, I think you've been treated unfairly." I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing. "That means more than you know." She glanced back at the dress. When I look at this, I don't see a source of drama. I see a gift, a work of art made with love. And I think someday, Sophie will see that too. Maybe not now, but someday. The words caught me off guard, warm and heavy in my chest. She turned to leave but paused. You might not be at the wedding, Claire, but your work will be remembered. When the event ended, I found a quiet corner in the museum's garden courtyard. The afternoon light filtered through the trees, warm on my face. For the first time in days, I let myself inhale deeply. Mrs. Bennet's kindness hadn't fixed everything, but it anchored me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. That evening, back at home, I took a picture, not of the dress, not of me, but of my sewing table bathed in golden light. I posted it with a simple caption: some stitches are visible, others are hidden deep in the fabric. Both hold the piece together. I didn't tag Sophie. I didn't need to. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're right, we're not done. But maybe we don't have to finish this in public. It wasn't signed, but I knew. And for the first time in months, I felt something that startled me: hope. Fragile, cautious hope, but hope nonetheless. I've learned something in these months that no book, no sermon, no quiet cup of tea on the porch could have taught me. You can't control how others tell your story. You can't force someone, no matter how close they are to you, to see your heart exactly the way you wish they would. But you can choose the stitches you lay down in your own life. Some of mine have been messy. I've sewn with hands trembling from anger, with eyes blurred by tears. I've made mistakes, not just in fabric, but in words. Times when I let my pain speak louder than my patience. But when I step back, I can still see the bigger pattern. Every choice, every act of grace, every boundary drawn in the sand, it's all part of the quilt of my life. Sophie and I are not fixed. We may never see eye to eye on that dress, or on the way this story unfolded. But I've decided that my love for her isn't measured by her approval of me. It's measured by my ability to keep showing up as her mother, even if I'm standing at a distance. And to you who might be sitting with your own fractured family, your own misunderstood gesture, your own story twisted in someone else's mouth, hear me. You are not defined by the worst version of the story being told about you. You are more than one chapter. You are the whole book. Hold your dignity close, even when you're tempted to throw it aside for the satisfaction of a quick comeback. Choose actions that let you look yourself in the mirror without flinching. And when the world feels too loud, step back and tend to the quiet work: plant the flowers, knead the bread, stitch the hem. Healing often happens in the softest moments. If this story has touched you, if you've felt a tug in your own heart as you listened, I hope you'll stay with me. There are more stories to tell of mothers, of daughters, of the complicated, beautiful, unbreakable threads that bind us. So please, subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth is still intact, and know that somewhere out there, another heart is stitching alongside yours. Because in the end, grace is the seam that holds us all together.